Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us on today's LinkedIn Live. Also, hi to those of you who are watching asynchronously, whatever time of day you're watching. So today I have a special guest, Duncan Angove, who is the CEO of Yonder, a company I had to do some research on because it turns out I think I use them, or at least the people that I do business with use them, but not household name. The company has more than 3,000 customers globally, 61 of the top 100 manufacturers, 68 of the top 100 retailers in the world, at least at last count in my research. But it was purchased by Panasonic for over $7 billion in 2021. And Duncan came in about a year ago, and I'm really excited to hear what attracted him here and then what his plans are. So welcome, Duncan. Really appreciate you taking time to be with us today.
Hi there. Good morning, Karen. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. So Yonder's been around since the mid-'80s, which is not typical, I think, for so many technology companies. Could you give us sort of a short summary of its history and the current value proposition?
Yeah, so we are, sort of like you said in your intro, we're the largest supply chain software company in the world. So we basically orchestrate digital fulfillment. And so we predict, pivot, and fulfill consumer demand wherever it happens. And then we basically orchestrate the movement of that across global supply chains, right? From warehousing to transportation to forecasting, replenishment to category management to labor, you name it. And like you said, people probably had to Google it. I remember it was funny because John Rahm is our brand ambassador. He has Blue Yonder on his shirt. And on the Sunday, we had 10 times the traffic on our website because everyone was like, what is Yonder?
Yeah.
They were Googling it to figure out what we do. And it's sort of interesting because no one really cared or knew about supply chains in detail. It's funny what happens when something breaks. Suddenly you realize what it is. And, we're the software that underpins making supply chains work. And to your point, you've been around a long time, a long history of always doing this in retail and manufacturing and third-party logistics. And through the years, we started out sort of in retailing, and then moved into planning and transportation, and more recently moved into warehouse management, and then moved into sort of e-commerce. So I've always been, building out the suite end to end, and now we have the largest suite and platform in the world.
Oh, well, first of all, congratulations on having John Rahm as an ambassador. That's a shirt people are actually going to be looking at on Sundays.
Yep.
So you came in about a year ago when I think supply chains were getting better, but still pretty broken. What was Yonder's sort of path through all the broken supply chain problems we've experienced over the past few years?
Yeah, it's arguably the hottest category in enterprise software. And the opportunity in some regards is still ahead of it. Unlike other categories of software like enterprise resource planning, the domains of the SAP, the Oracles, the Workdays, where they consolidated the back office, HR, finance, procurement, you name it. And then, sort of the front office like Salesforce with sales, service, marketing, they've been consolidated. That same thing has not happened in supply chain software. It's still very much served by sort of fragmented point solutions. And, our differentiation is that we're sort of end to end. We do all of it relative to everyone else, and basically consolidated, this category. So that's a big value proposition. It's sort of important in supply chains that stakeholders are all aligned across the value chain around how we're going to go fulfill consumer demand. Yet ironically, it was the one category that did that through a whole bunch of point solutions and not an integrated end-to-end suite of software. So that's where we laid our stall out, and it's really what makes us differentiated.
Great. Well, my research says you had a super successful year last year with over 600 million in ARR and about 10 million in services. How are you dealing with what I think most of my clients are calling headwinds this year?
It's interesting because we have not really seen that. And I think that's because budgets are shifting to supply chain. You look at the current macroeconomic environment, and you sort of alluded to it, they've always been the long-term secular trends of like e-commerce, for example. Supply chains weren't built to ship eaches in the last mile. They were built to send full pallets efficiently as possible to stores. And then the whole green movement, how do you make supply chains more sustainable and responsible? And obviously, like we were talking about earlier, more resilient. So Suez happens, we don't all get caught off guard, and there's labor shortages and all sorts of things going on. So in a more sort of uncertain environment like we're in, C-level executives are generally thinking about managing cost. All right, you're seeing budget shift from categories to cost. You're seeing budgets come to supply chain because they're figuring out we have to make them more resilient. I read in the paper yesterday that construction and manufacturing in the US has doubled year on year. In 1 year, it doubled because obviously people are reshoring manufacturing, and as they build new facilities, they're thinking about how do we make them more automated? How do we make them more green? How do we make them more intelligent? And, that's obviously what we do. So we're seeing budget shift to it because we're helping them manage all this massive change that's going on, and we help them, manage cost and get more resilient.
Yeah, well, you just remind me, I had a chance to speak with Brad Jacobs, who started company RPO, just had a spinoff, who really revolutionized the moving of pallets, let's say, through software. So a lot going on in your field.
So Karen, that's interesting because they spun off GXO, which was their e-commerce direct business, and they're one of our largest customers, right?
Oh,
so
terrific.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know what they're like to work with, but they were terrifically nice people to speak with.
Based in the
Brad
UK,
and his team. Yeah. Exactly. Terrific. So you're getting ready to celebrate your first year anniversary as CEO at Blue Yonder, as I mentioned earlier. I'm curious about sort of your goals for the next 365 days, but also any sort of big lessons learned coming into a company at the scale with this growth during your first year. So sort of a look back and a look forward.
Yes, if I look back, myself and the team that's come in is a very, very growth-oriented management team, and also a lot of very, very strong seasoned operators that know how to execute at scale and deliver excellence in what we do. And the latter is very important because what we do is mission critical. If your Salesforce instance is down and sales reps can't update their pipeline for 30 minutes, okay, it's not great. If your warehouse is down at peak, all right, the CEO is calling. So it's extraordinary. It's like a healthcare system. It's extraordinarily mission critical. Yeah. So the prerequisite on delivering a highly scalable, highly secure, highly resilient supply chain cloud service requires really strong operating chops. So that's the first thing that we sort of focused on. Let's differentiate on the quality of our cloud service. And then the second thing was we spent last year basically saying, how do we go after the opportunity that is playing out right now? Supply chain is having its zeitgeist moment. There's a whole bunch of new technology coming along, which in essence represents a new computing platform, much like the internet and mobile that went before it. We take that as a canvas and the sponsorship of Panasonic, who own us, and grow this business dramatically faster. And that's what we spent last year doing. The next 12 months is about, let's make sure we execute flawlessly on that vision plan.
Great. So I read that you're getting ready to take Blue Yonder through a massive organization transformation. Maybe you've started that based on your preceding comments, but you've recently invested about $1 billion in transformational technologies. Can you talk about more specifically what it is you're transforming and how?
Yeah, so firstly, the organizational transformation we went through was to support the strategy and the vision that we have going forward. And some of those were about breaking down silos and making sure that we go to market and we think more like a suite and platform company versus a point solution company like the rest of the market. So that required a lot of organizational thinking. The second thing is that I've always had a product first mentality. I'm the first CEO in 20 years at Blue Yonder that's not sales or finance, right? As you know, most of the time it's the head of sales or the CFO that gets the job.
It's the go-to-market guys. Yeah.
Right. I'm an engineer. I'm a software engineer.
Me too.
Right?
Yeah. Great.
So I've always believed that in product first. If you get the product right, everything else will take care of itself, right? It's self-referencing, markets itself, sells itself, delivers more value, upgrades, all of that takes care of itself. And within that product first philosophy, there are sort of two principles. The first is challenge conventional thinking. It's too easy in the software industry to be incremental. And software companies just leapfrog each other with every release, and they do what's called, they sort of follow and fill in. What do they have? I don't have, fill it in, and everyone just does that, and it's incremental. And the thing about supply chains is there's a huge opportunity to reimagine how it should work based on today's technology and the business challenges that we have today that I talked about earlier. So that was the first thing, always challenging product management, consulting, development to challenge conventional thinking and take risks. It's interesting because we're a US-based company, but Americans are no longer risk takers. This country was built by risk takers. And, within reasons, obviously we're not risking the resiliency of our supply chain service, but we can take bigger risks, bigger bets. So that was sort of the first thing under product first. And the second was architect our product roadmap and our strategy from our customer's income statement and balance sheet back. Right. So most product roadmaps are built on, total addressable market and what's my competitive win loss and all these things that are very internal. They're not built on the customers. And the idea is that if you add, for example, features to your product roadmap that are architected from how they improve your customer's income statement and balance sheet back, right? And you do that over and over and over again, at the end of the day, your software delivers fundamentally more business value than anyone else in the market. And that becomes your moat, right? So those are sort of the two product first philosophies. So a lot of the transformational stuff we went through is how do we make sure that our investments are lined up around product first, right? And that we're super efficient everywhere we can be so that we can double down on product first. The $1 billion investment is tied to that. So that was spending a year saying, what does a very, very aggressive, bold vision for supply chain look like? And what are the investments required in development, in product management, and cloud to basically unleash it? And over the next 3 years, it's about $1 billion investment to build this, we're calling it the supply chain operating system for the world.
Oh, big vision. Yeah. And I'm imagining it must have been easier to go through this change to being a platform as opposed to siloed products, given the investment and the backing of the company Panasonic. Many companies your size can't do that, right? They go public, they go private, do the transformation, and then come back to the public markets again. So
funny you say that, Karen. It does feel like a take private.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't do this in a public company or something that's institutionally backed, particularly in today's market. So we're very, very fortunate to have them as a sponsor. And they've always taken a long-term view around building enduring companies. They're one of the first backers of Tesla, right? And believing that innovation is what drives a company forward. So the alignment was great.
Great. I have a question from online, and then after this, I want to turn to you and your leadership style. So this is from Christian Zakarian. He says, how do you face the challenges of large CG companies in the Middle East or GCC region who are reluctant to invest enough in automation and software because the region's pretty labor intensive? So how do you face challenges of large companies who are reluctant to invest enough in automation?
Yeah, so you have to have it comes back to what I said earlier, you have to have a very, very compelling value proposition, right? Like, so for example, when we sell software in India, I mean, headcount there is generally cheaper. And if the value proposition of putting in enterprise software is to replace labor, it's somewhat muted there, right? So the value proposition of selling, for example, in that market is generally more digital transformation, more growth oriented, things you would not be able to do. It's not just about replacing humans with software. So it's a different mindset. And listen, FMCG, CPG, food and bev, those industries are undergoing a remarkable digital transformation from, direct to consumer to all the stuff around sustainability, and that's hard to do with current systems, and just throwing people at it doesn't really solve the problems. So it is a unique environment in terms of looking at those different companies that operate in those geographies. We've invested in a whole team that does strategic services. So for example, they'll come in and they'll help clients build a joint digital transformation roadmap. People that'll come in and build, how does this impact the P&L and what are sort of the growth investments and all of that. But change management is obviously a big part of all of this.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, I'll not pull on that thread. Thank you. So your tagline is fulfill your potential. That is terrific, which it sounds like maybe your strategic services group are helping your customers sort out what that means for them. How are you applying that internally for your very large organization?
So, it's funny because after being here for a year, you do kind of step back and say, okay, what are the big learnings and all of that, and what makes us special? And it sounds like an awful cliche because everyone puts this in like an investor deck is your people and your culture. The difference here is it's absolutely remarkable, Karen. The quality of the people here and the passion they have for each other and doing the right thing for our customers is remarkable. And the tenure of some of our people is long. And, when they walk in the room and they're having a conversation with someone that operates a warehouse or is running, a manufacturing planning solution or how do I optimize my transportation fleet, or how do I reconfigure my supply chains to support COVID? Like, the lights darken. They're just, these people are incredibly bright, extremely hardworking, and very passionate. So that is unquestionably the secret sauce of Blue Yonder. We're a software business, right? So your people and your intellectual property. We don't have buildings and
right.
factories and all of that. So that's remarkable. So I know I talked about product first earlier, but you always hear companies talk about being customer centric, right? And I think sometimes you're actually better off being associate centric. And I remember there was this white paper done a long time ago, and it was called the employee customer profit chain. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but the idea was that and it was for a retailer, if you invest in your people and they're highly enabled, highly skilled, and very, very happy, then that means they'll serve customers in a much more effective, happy way. There'll be less escalations, less unhappiness, higher cross sells, all of that ultimately lead in profit. So the idea was, customer centricity is just a euphemism for giving away margin for things that go wrong, right? Maybe that's too extreme, but whereas putting associates first and investing in them, much like product, right, actually leads to happy. If you do both those things, let's say you put those up, that leads to happy customers, growth, and profits, and everything else takes care of itself.
And having a product that works is something. It's absolutely something that helps your associates help your customers. So,
100%. There's no point investing in your people if your products aren't good, right? They're hard to sell. Salespeople don't make money. Consulting are angry because they're overrun on budgets. Get the product right. And there's a lot.
It's a downward spiral. Yeah.
In software, people want to be working on winning teams with great product, happy customers.
Yeah, it's great. So you must have also taken the culture through a transformation within Blue Yonder. Because I think about this being a decades-old legacy company, I can imagine what the systems must have been like prior to the transformation. So it's one thing to say, okay, we need new types of software, we're moving to the cloud, but you also have a lot of sort of legacy engineers, legacy people in the organization who, at least in my experience, are not always as open to change as you might want them to be. How did you take the organization through the transformation?
Well, the first thing is, when I got here, it certainly wasn't a legacy company, right? They were planning to go IPO, ended up selling to Panasonic instead. So all the things that needed to be done were done. I mean, the products, the three core markets we're in, warehousing, transportation, planning, were top right Magic Quadrant for Gartner. We're the only company that's in that space. But the culture was already very, very good. The things that we had to change were, I said it earlier, don't think like a point solution company. Think like a suite and enterprise and a soft. That is very, very important. That also means getting better at working across silos. And those are probably the two biggest cultural transformations. I think the company had a very strong and healthy culture to begin with, and then we're putting a extreme focus on execution excellence. And, I sit on the board of Honeywell, which is the world's largest industrial conglomerate. And much like other conglomerates, they've come up with their own operating system, and they have to execute at a level that we don't in software, because their margins are just fundamentally different. And that's why out of that sector, things like Six Sigma and Lean and all those things came out of those sectors, right? And in software, if I'm honest, I mean, we have 80% recurring profits because we have ARR and all of that. And you don't really have to operate as hard, right? So we're going to change that, right? We're going to operate at an excellence level that you generally don't see in software and become a source of differentiation. To where my aspiration is as a parent, if your kid is graduating from school and they've either taken a supply chain degree or a business degree or a software degree, you're encouraging them to start their career at Blue Yonder, because it's a management foundation that will go with them for the rest of their life. Like it used to be at IBM or P&G, all of that. And that's what we aspire to be, right? That's what we aspire to be. So to your question earlier, that requires investing in our people. We've got excellence days that we do where we focus on commercial excellence, product development excellence, all of that, and just become phenomenal at execution and known for it. Really, really high say-do ratio.
Terrific. So that sort of leads me to thinking about you and your leadership. How would you describe your leadership style?
I am not it's interesting because people talk about the industry managers and leaders, right? And it's sort of like you're in a trench in World War I, and a manager is someone that holds a pistol to everyone and we go out over the top, right? Whereas a leader, you go out up front and everyone follows you. And I definitely fall more into the latter camp. And, believe in empowering my people. And at the end of the day, the journey is as important as the destination. So we use this analogy that we spent the last year basically building the schematics for a rocket ship, and it's on the launch pad, it's fueled with Panasonic gas, and all of us are going to fly it to the moon together. And my point is just getting to the moon isn't the point. It's actually all of us on the journey on the rocket ship together and enjoying it along the way. So that's certainly one thing. And then, encouraging people to think big and act fast is another, and not fall into incrementalism. And then back to the execution thing, you have to have an extreme culture of accountability. And it's okay to call people out. We're all just trying to make each other better. And, we spend an inordinate amount of time in our manager meetings around, what are the 5 big risks that we're worried about? What could go wrong? And what are we doing to mitigate them? And just a relentless focus on that.
Terrific. You mentioned earlier taking risks and the importance of taking risks, which I couldn't agree more with. And people have to feel like it's safe to take a risk, because taking a risk is risky. How do you encourage your organization to do that?
Well, first of all, we tell them it's okay to if it doesn't work out, right? I do think a lot of times in software that risk taking fails, believe it or not, because of poor execution. When you look at the new product introduction success rate in the enterprise software industry, it's appalling, Karen. I mean, I've seen stats where it's as high as 70%. It's really hard to build new software because people don't put the right focus around it. We focus on sales and we focus on product development. You don't focus on all the things that actually ensure it gets successfully launched and people are trained and enabled and it's tested and all those sorts of things. So I think risk-taking an environment where we're going to execute flawlessly becomes a little bit safer and a much, much higher success rate. And we're going to make it endemic across the organization. Like it's, now listen, we're not saying we're going crazy and we're risking our supply chains and all of that. But, it's like we're doing tons of, we announced a quantum computing pilot last month, so, listen, it's a big bet, but it's, again, I find in America, like or even in most companies, if you have a choice between A and B, and A has a 90% chance of doing it, but it only pays out 100 million, versus B has a 20% chance, but it's $1 billion, people always pick A. Yeah. And this whole idea of risk-adjusted decision-making, and you have to have a balanced portfolio, but not everything would look like that. But if we think the payoff is really, really big on behalf of our customers, back to their income statement and balance sheet, and it differentiates us, we will encourage it.
Terrific. All right. So my last question for you, my tagline for my business is up and to the right, because that's the spot on the 2x2 matrix where we always want to be, including your Gartner Magic Quadrant designation. Congrats on that. So you've had quite a storied career, Anderson Consulting, Retech, Oracle, Infor, Spring, Honeywell, Yonder. Was there a moment in your career or an event when you knew that you as a leader, as a professional, were moving in that direction, up and to the right?
Yeah, it was probably when, Retech was an extraordinary company to be a part of, right? This is the late 90s when the internet came along, and we were early in a lot of different things. And we ended up taking it public in 99. And I remember we were on it was NASDAQ, so the trading floor was all electronic, right? And I remember we were in this little conference room, and it's the day we were IPOing. And I didn't know this, but it doesn't go out when the market opens. There's someone that's a market maker. So we went around the side of the room where all the terminals were, where people were trading, and the market makers sat there. And you can see on his screen the spread between buy and sell. And it's sort of really wide, and it gets narrow the whole time until it locks in and they have a point, and they hit a button and it goes out. And it's just a crazy feeling, I was a very early employee there, and it was just all that hard work. And, it was just, that was sort of the moment where I knew, okay, this is up and to the right from here. So
terrific. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you joining us today and sharing so much of what you've both gone through and taken Blue Yonder through. So I will wish you and your team the best, and take good care, Duncan. Hope to see you again soon.
You too, Karen. Thanks for having me on.